What's up, college sports fans? I'm Stucky.
I'm Colin Wilson.
I'm Mike Calabrese.
I'm Maria Marino.
I'm Charlie DiSturco, and we're excited that the Big Bets on Campus brand is launching its very own YouTube channel.
You'll be able to find every episode of the BBOC podcast, live shows, and other college sports content on this new channel.
Not only will the channel be dedicated to betting on college sports, but you'll also be able to find exclusive interviews with former college athletes,
College football power rankings,
and updates on other topics like the brand new College Football 25 video game series and the ins and outs of the recruiting trail all the way down to the transfer portal.
whether you're into college football,
College basketball,
College baseball, or any of the college sports.
We are the home for college sports, and BBOC is the channel for you.
make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any of the action. I'll see you there. What's up, Degenerate Nation? Welcome to the Big Bets on Campus podcast presented by BetMGM. This is the SEC College Football Betting Preview Part 1. I'm Stucky, and joining me, as always, my BBOC co-host, Colin Wilson. Excited to talk. Save the best for last. Some SEC, it just means more.
it just means more. It's also our conference. Our Kentucky Wildcats and our Arkansas Razorbacks are here. We got two new additions to the conference. This is the cream of the crop. This is the bar. This is the measuring stick. So I'm ready to fire because after telling everyone Ohio State's not making the playoff in the Big Ten preview, we'll see if I got anything. I got a fade on a pretty hot team in this one too.
Yeah, so the way that we're going to structure this, like always, we're going to do the SEC in two parts. And obviously there's no divisions now, but we're going to structure it following the old division format. So this episode will be the SEC or I guess I should say the old SEC East teams plus Texas. So we'll hit Georgia, Kentucky, Florida, Missouri, Tennessee, South Carolina, Vandy, Texas. Part 2 will be the old SEC West plus Oklahoma. For those that have lived under a rock, Texas and Oklahoma are now in the SEC. And then at the end of Part 2, we will recap all of our favorite bets in totality. So let's, I guess right before we jump in, talking about the SEC, there are, you could argue, it just means more. You could argue, just to illustrate how loaded the SEC is, you could argue based on where, your power ratings are or where they end up, that there are 9 top 15, probably for most people, 9 top 20 teams in this conference. It is stacked top to bottom. There are, with 12 college football spots, we kind of mentioned this on another earlier podcast. There's maybe a max. What do you? I'll throw it to you. Do you think there's a max of 4? Crazy world 5. If there are like 5, 4 10-win SEC teams plus another that wins it when gets the automatic berth. But I think that 4 is probably very likely. So if you're an SEC team and you get the 10 wins, you're going to have a really, really good chance of making it to the college football playoff. I think I would agree that the top 4 is pretty close to it's not a lock. So we have to see how everything else plays out, but pretty close to just get the 10 wins in the SEC and you're in. Would you agree?
Well, I have 5 teams projected 9.2 or better. I don't think the committee could ever take 5 teams from the SEC just based upon the fact of what you're going to get and the complaints you're going to get from the rest of the conferences. The Big Ten's going to think that they're going to need 4 or 5. If you get 5, we should get 5. If the Big 12 is getting 2 or 3 teams less, there's going to be a lot of complaint there. ACC, same situation, and I think one of the teams at the top is going to have a subpar season and they're going to miss the playoff. And my question is that a 10-win team, like you said, Stuck, or is that a 9-win team? I mean, I am still, this is one of those conferences where I see a lot of teams finishing 7-1. And I mean, when you got 3 of those, here we go. How are you going to determine those tiebreakers? But no, I do have 5 teams over 9.2. So they'll have candidates. The question is, who's going to get left out?
Yeah, from a betting perspective, Georgia heavy favorite to make it. Texas also a decent sized favorite. Alabama around even money. Ole Miss is a small favorite. So those are the market, is saying Georgia, Texas, Alabama, Ole Miss. And then you have LSU, small dog to make it. Missouri closer to 2-1 to make it. Then Oklahoma 5-1. And then what? I think Texas A&M closer to plus 250, and then you have your longer shot. So there's a lot of teams that are in the mix from an odds perspective. So let's just dive right in. Let's start with Georgia. The Bulldogs, as I just mentioned, minus 600 to make the college football playoff. Their win total sitting at 10.5, juiced a bit to the over. This team has a lot of continuity from a coaching and player perspective. Top 30 in returning production, led by quarterback Carson Beck. I mean, look, it's an absolutely loaded team. The number 1 recruiting class again. Last year, you could argue that they were the best team in the country. At least from a power rating perspective, they were for me. Last year, they beat 5 ranked teams by an average of 34 points per game. And then they lost to Bama by 3. Obviously, the Florida State win against a lot of their backups inflates that a bit, but they dominated all of the ranked teams that they played outside of that Alabama game, winning all 5 by double digits. The schedule isn't easy. It's I have it as one of the 10 hardest in the country. I have them favored in every game, but 3 are under a touchdown. At Texas, at Alabama, at Ole Miss. What you'll notice there is that their 3 toughest games, all away from home. They also start with Clemson in Atlanta. So, their 4 toughest opponents won't be played in their home stadium. What are your thoughts on the Bulldogs? Obviously, just loaded both sides of the ball. But what are your overarching thoughts here?
Well, 5-1 was the number I grabbed last January when I saw it posted. I know, and to quote my friend Stuckey, year of the chalk, 5-1 I thought was way too long. It's 3-1 right now. And I have to say, I think there's a ton of value on it. Now, when you go to TARP, when you check the transfer activity, when you check the returning production, 85% returns at least on both sides of the ball. When you check counting stats, and no matter what category on both sides of the ball, that is an unbelievable thing for a team that is consistently just completely rated by the NFL, especially on defense every year. Georgia's going to return 9 of their top 13 tacklers. And I think the one thing that Kirby was questioned about at SEC Media Day was who's going to play nickel. He hasn't really identified who's playing nickel. He's mentioned that it is the most critical position in his 4-2-5 defense of Glenn Schumann. Co-DC now comes in. Travaris Robinson, he was Bama's corners coach, did an amazing job. Terry and Arnold, what the job that some of those corners have done there, been fantastic. So no drop off on this defense. 9 of your top 13 are back. Then you go to the offense and you think, well, Brock Bowers isn't there. And man, has he been just the glue, the lifeblood. Ladd McConkey has been the hot go-to wide receiver for multiple quarterbacks during his time. But then you look at the weapons that they got. That goes in and snags Trevor Etienne from Florida. And then they went to Stanford. Huge. 4.1 yards after contact on 120 rushing attempts. He's electric. Then you went and got the guy that, in my opinion, if you're going to go grab Georgia for the national title, it's because of this addition. It's Benjamin Urasek of Stanford. If you watch any Stanford games, which I did a lot with the under last year, he lines up everywhere. Slot, H-back, running back, wide out. He's everywhere. And what you lost in Brock Bowers, you're going to get the exact same role here for Ben Urasek. As you know, Georgia started practice today. He's healthy. He's playing. These weapons to me are more important, bigger than I would say Ra Thomas, who's in some legal troubles right now. And then when you talk about Ra Thomas getting in legal troubles, oh yeah, Colby Young joins from Miami. I mean, it is absolutely one of the nastiest rosters, especially from an experience perspective. It's not like I'm just talking about
Oscar Delp's still around too at tight end.
Oscar Delp. See, and so when you talk about this schedule and what we're going to do with this future, Alabama, Texas, and Ole Miss are the only games on the schedule they could potentially lose. Has Ole Miss really closed a 35-point gap? We'll see. Has Texas, we're going to talk about them. Go historically look what they do after Red River. Well, where does Georgia play them after Red River? Alabama, I'll say. I think there's a key issue against Alabama. But if you could pull one of those three, you're sitting at 10-2. You're a playoff team. I don't want to worry about the SEC championship because I think multiple teams could finish at 7-1. I don't want to worry about, are you going to make a playoff with this number that's absolutely out of control? I think they get a bye into the quarters. And if they do host a home game, good luck. So I think Georgia for the national championship, not because it's the year of the chalk. There is no roster complete from top to bottom, too deep depth chart, which you have to have every year to win the college football playoff because you're going to have to play a minimum of 3 rounds. You're going to have health. You're going to have depth. They got it.
Yeah, I mean, one of the headlines of who they lost in the offseason is, we mentioned it, McConkey and Bowers. You got to remember, they were hurt though last year, so like they played without those 2 guys, and yeah, so they're fine at the skill positions. I do want to watch. They lost 2 really good offensive linemen. You have Truss coming back, so the loss of at Mims, I don't think is. I don't think there's going to be a big drop off there. The center position after losing Van Pran, I just want to watch how the interior offensive line comes together. Most likely Wilson there. Defensive back, you do lose 3 in the first 90 picks, but there's talent everywhere. If this defense wants to go, because last year the defense wasn't as good as it was 2 years ago, 3 years ago. We're still talking about one of, if not the best defense in college football, but it didn't have that, that next elite step.
Right.
Lose Dumas Johnson at linebacker, but you have like 5-star freaks waiting in the wings. And does a guy like Michael Williams does he take a big step and become that just generational pass rusher? So there's some spots on the defense I want to watch just to see, like, can Georgia get back to that super duper elite level? They're obviously going to be one of, if not the best defenses regardless, but those are some of the things that I'm watching. But, really nitpicking here with Georgia, who I have power rated number 1 in all of college football heading into the season. I assume you're the same.
Same.
Yeah, plus 185-ish to win the SEC. All right, let's move on to a team in my backyard, the Kentucky Wildcats. Kentucky, they made me sweat for a push last year for my win total. This year, over 6.5, just a bit to the over. Another team that has a lot of returning production, specifically on defense. I think the front 7 of that defense is the strength. And you could say also the big blue wall, is it potentially back along the offensive line? A couple years where they were down a bit, but they're going to return a ton. And they had and that's another SEC transfer to that group, so they could be pretty strong in the trenches. There is a new quarterback with Devin Leary out, who dealt with some inconsistent play and some injury issues last year. It's now going to be a former 5-star, Brock Vanderbilt, from Georgia, who couldn't win the starting job there, transferred to Lexington. He now takes over. New offensive coordinator, Bush Hamden, comes in from Boise State. Still should be a pro-style-esque offense, but there will be some changes, just some tweaks to what that looks like. The offensive line, like Georgia, I want to see just, can that offensive line take the next step back to where we saw Kentucky 3-4 years ago, the true big blue wall. It's not going to hold them back, but it could prevent them from winning 7 or 8 games instead of 5 or 6. I think that might end up determining the win totals. How good is this offensive line? And then obviously how good is Vanderbilt? You do lose Ray Davis at running back, who left for the NFL. You bring in Chip Trayanum from Ohio State. I think there's a slight drop off there. You bring your 2 top receivers back, bring in Macklin from North Texas, 1,000-yard receiver. The biggest question on the team to me, besides quarterback, just because of the uncertainty, is the defensive backfield. This is a team that was bottom 10 nationally in completion percentage, passing success rate allowed, and that's an experienced D, but the secondary just has questions to me, especially cornerback number 2, because the defensive backfield struggled last year, and you lose a cornerback to the NFL. From a scheduling perspective, with the new SEC schedule, you flipped Arkansas from last year. So if we're comparing last year's schedule to this year, you replaced Arkansas, Missouri, and Mississippi State with Auburn, Texas, and Ole Miss. So definitely got a little bit more difficult. The biggest jumps there, I mean, Texas is obviously better than Missouri, but you were replacing Miss State with Ole Miss. And because of those questions within the secondary, heavy zone-based defense, you're facing Ewers, Beck, Nico, and Dart, 4 of the names that you'll see at the top of the Heisman list. So that defense in the secondary is definitely going to get tested in those 4 games where they'll be sizable underdogs. 100-1 to win the SEC. Mentioned Dumas Johnson at linebacker, big get for Kentucky. He comes in from Georgia. I think when you're handicapping this team, like there's going to be some teams on this schedule, because I project personally I'm right around 6'2", 6'3", so I showed a tiny bit of value on the under. I think that if they don't really pull off an upset, a big upset, I think they're going to need to beat South Carolina, Auburn, and Louisville to get to 7 wins. I think that's basically what their win total comes down to. Good news on both. If you look at those 3 games, all of them are at home, and we don't really know how effective South Carolina and Auburn will be throwing the ball. And there's not going to be a lot of teams that can just line up and run on Kentucky. Their run defense should be extremely proficient once again this year. So that's something to keep in mind when kind of handicapping Kentucky. What are your thoughts? And then at Florida, too, they'll be dogs there. Gator, big time revenge from last year. What are your thoughts on Kentucky headed into this year?
Well, that was, right down to almost the projected win total you have is about almost exactly what I have on just about everything. But let's talk about Bush Hamdan on offense. He comes in as offensive coordinator, and you say, well, is it Liam Cohen's offense still? It's the same exact thing. Stoops wanted this offense. He knows Hamdan can run it. Hamdan's a perfect match for this offense and what he does. But the Broncos, Boise State, where Hamdan came from, the Broncos did have an up-tempo gear that was used in certain spots. I know Stoops has spoke about how he wants an up-tempo gear, but now he's got an offensive coordinator that did it. Boise still was 89th fastest in the country. They're not speed demons, but they did have that gear where they can go up-tempo. So expect to see that out of Kentucky, which will be new. Broad Vandegrift, 21 passes since the 2021 season. Tough. No one's going to sit around and say that they know what this kid's going to produce for Kentucky, but Hamdan's going to call on Vandegrift to run. Taylon Green had more than 360 yards on designed runs last year. So, and Vandegrift's got it in his profile, in his recruiting profile, that he can take off out of the pocket and do some things. I agree with you on Chip Trayanum from Ohio State. He's just got very tepid numbers in breakaway and elusiveness. His yards after contact, his missed tackles created, it's just, they're not there. And plus, what do you have? Double-digit rushing attempts just once last year on the schedule? I understand Ohio State's loaded, but he never got to like 10 or more carries. Can he be a workhorse is the question. When you go to the other side, this defense, I think it's the nastiest and potentially best front 7 in all of the SEC. They finished with a top 25 stuff rate. They have nose tackle Deion Walker back. Do you know how hard it is to create a pressure from nose? It's hard. He had 51 pressures. He grades out as the best run defender on this defense. He's everything. He does them both. And everybody on the line does, but he's absolutely the best. And then I know the secondary is the place to pick on Kentucky, but corner Max Harrison, he was second team all SEC, had 9 passes defense. I think an even split from like 5 INTs and 4 PBUs. So Brad White, I think the problem on this defense is, and I couldn't figure it out and I couldn't find anything in the notes, this defense went from a top 25 third down defense to 100. They're outside the top 100 last year. What was the reasoning for such poor work on third down? Passing downs. So that has to get resolved. The secondary can be an issue. Now, you already mentioned the schedule.
Free completions all over the place all year long.
Yeah. Now they have a brutal road schedule, brutal SEC road schedule. Texas, Tennessee, Ole Miss, not good, right? There's only so many wins you can get here. I mean, even Kroger Field, you're going to see Georgia, Louisville. I mean, this is not an easy schedule whatsoever. They will be comfortably favored in 4 games, but they're going to be double-digit dogs to Georgia and Texas. No chance to win those. Well, you mentioned the coin flips. Coin flip, South Carolina, Auburn, Louisville. Now, we haven't talked about South Carolina yet. I don't expect any passing game out of that offense. They don't even have a wide receiver from last year. And Sellers is they say dual threat, but it's generally mostly on the ground. Auburn, on the other hand, I would potentially worry about Peyton Thorne. I've
Definitely
seen some
better receiver too this year.
Yeah. And Louisville, you can't convince me that Tyler Shook is going to be healthy by the time game 12 comes around. My projection is 5.99 on this team. Kentucky has to sweep that trio of coin flips. So I'm under 6.5. I don't enjoy it. I like this team this year. I love the defense. Got to have improved third downs. Complete mystery at the quarterback position. I'm going under 6.5, but you know what? Just like I do every year with a Kentucky win total, I'm willing to play the other side in game 12 against Louisville. So I do like the under, though.
Yeah, I like the under as well. I would love for someone in the market with influence that loves Kentucky to bet the over, and because I'm very willing to pay a steep juice on under 7, which I think is their ceiling. So I would love to get that, but I agree with you on the under. And if they don't beat both Auburn and South Carolina, I think we'll both be improved. Now, matchup wise, there's some decent things to like for Kentucky facing, but if they don't beat both of them and say they split, then you're right. It probably comes down to that finale against Louisville, who should be better throwing the ball this year. The question is, will Shuck still be healthy for that regular season finale? But I would agree. I think it's under or nothing on the Cats. All right, let's head a bit more south and talk some Florida Gators, who have now had 3 straight losing seasons for the first time since the 1940s. Market says it'll be a 4th. Win total 4.5, heavily juiced to the over. And it's a bizarre thing to see. A program like Florida with a win total of 4.5 for a team that has talent. Graham Mertz come back at quarterback. You do lose Ricky Pearsall and the aforementioned ETN at running back, but I like their talent at wide receiver, especially after bringing Badger in. Mertz's old running mate, DK. Really good tight end. Zipper is healthy. Boardingham. The big question on offense is the offensive line. Major issues last year. Sacks dropped they went from 15th in the country to 115th. Yards per carry dropped from 5.8 to 4.1. You're moving some guys around. There's some transfers at tackle, including one from Arkansas, who will probably get some run. You're probably kicking George into guard from tackle. Your center spot is solid, but there's a lot of moving pieces here, some new faces. Can they come together? The depth is also, especially at guard, is pretty worrying if there's some injuries. The defense is going to be under the tutelage of the same coordinator, but they bring in a new co-DC and then staff changes throughout after a really poor season last year. So the big, like, when I look at what went wrong last year with this team, it was the offensive line, no explosive passing, and they gave up way too many explosive plays. So they had an explosive play problem both sides of the ball. So if the offensive line doesn't work out, by the way, which is just so critical for me and something that I'm monitoring so closely. Say this offensive line doesn't work out with Florida. Good luck against Miami, Texas A&M, Tennessee. We just talked about UK's front. Georgia, Texas, Florida State, Ole Miss. I think these teams have pretty good defensive lines. So if your offensive line isn't working, this season's done. And by the way, did you just hear me mention those teams? That's because this is one of, if not the most difficult schedule in college football history. I have them dogs in 8 games, double-digit dogs in 3. They have 1 free win. Their free win, and your boy Billy Good old Billy. He better win this game or he's gone after week 2. It's at home against Sanford. They face 6 of the top 7 in the SEC, plus they're three non-conference games against Florida rivals, Miami, Florida State, and UCF. UCF is supposed to be like another gimme game. Nope, it's UCF. So this schedule, like, you want to hear this is the by far the hardest schedule in the country. Do you want to hear the final 5? So you play Kentucky at home. Better win that game on this schedule, because then you finish Georgia at Texas, LSU, Ole Miss, at Florida State. 6 teams on this schedule that finish in the AP top 17. 11 Power 4 teams plus Sanford. There's also some things that Napier has to clean up. Penalties, short yardage, special teams, all really bad.
113th and tackling.
Tackling, just a lot to clean up. There is only 4 true road games. Napier has been much better at home. And speaking of your boy Napier, scare money don't make money. He's on the hot seat. So when will, if they struggle, is he gone midseason? Could this team could be lost, and the locker room could be lost, and we don't there's a lot of questions about where this could go, because it could go south quick with this schedule. One of your easiest games at Mississippi State, you're on the road there after hosting Texas A&M. The Miami game to start the season, small home dogs, obviously going to be a big swing, especially for the win total. I project 5.15. So I mathematically small lean to the over numerically, but with this schedule, the questions on the offensive line as of right now, no thanks. Not investing in Florida over. What are your thoughts on the Gators?
It's sad that I like this team so much. Starting with Graham Mertz, he's coming back for his 5th season. He had a 20-3 ratio of TD to INT. But man, go look at his big time throws and turnover worthy plays. He had double big time throws, and he did turnover worthy plays. And I remember a time at Wisconsin when the kid couldn't throw in a pocket with pressure. Well, pressure on Mertz means nothing now. He generated the same adjusted completion percentage last year in the pocket and pressured downs. He had 15 big time throws to just 2 turnover worthy plays on passes that exceeded 10 yards. And he's going to need protection. They weren't bad in protecting last year, weren't great. But at the same time, if he gets hurt, if there's any injury here, it's done. Everything is done, right? I mean, he is that integral to this, especially when you lose a Trevor Etienne to Georgia. So 3 starters are back. You're right. Damian George did not grade very well at Alabama. He was left tackle, right tackle switch. They're going to kick him into guard. Brandon Crenshaw-Dixon has 2,400 snaps of experience in 4 years from San Diego State. Big body that they were able to get in there. So they have enough size and they have experience, but they got to get the rotation down in the offensive line, because I think protection of Graham Mertz is the most important piece to this Florida offense this year. Now on defense. And
it's a big jump too. So I want to see it with you're going from San Diego State to the hardest schedule of defensive lines in the country. Mm-hmm. So that's going to be an important piece to watch.
The defense just did not get solved with this Austin Armstrong hire out of Southern Miss last year. I mean, he was the hot coordinator that came in, and they still could not tackle well. They finished 124th in big play percentage, allowing big plays. A lot of problems here. And what did we go do this offseason? We went and hired Ron Roberts to be co-DC. Roberts has been fired twice in the last 2 years. He's been fired from Auburn. He's been fired from Baylor. And you say, well, what's the connection here? Well, Ron Roberts was on the coach's staff at Louisiana in 2018 and 2019. So there's a connection there. There's a familiarity there. But Roberts has not produced anything on the field in his last 2 stops. So the defensive interior, Caleb Banks, he lists at 6'6". He grades as their best run stopper on the team. And safety Jordan Castile returns after leading the team in tackles. So there's some goodness on the defense, but they have got to stop. They're better against the run. They're 14th in defensive rushing success rate outside the top 100 against the pass. It's got to be fixed. Their non-conference games you mentioned against the state of Florida, that's a much bigger game to Central Florida than it is to the Gators. And
they're already talking about that game.
Oh, and everybody's talking about this November schedule. And the one thing that stuck out to me right away is not the list of these last 5 games that they're playing against, but the fact that Georgia, Texas, and Ole Miss all come off a bye week. They get 2 weeks to get fresh after an SEC schedule. and then head into play. I mean, I feel this is just brutal. It's not even fair. So, Florida's going to be small favorites to UCF and Kentucky. That's it. Those aren't guaranteed winnable games. I'd argue that both of those teams are good enough to easily beat Florida. And, I want +3 in the opener against Miami. I think that they're in a good shot, very first game of the season, because I know Graham Mertz is going to be healthy. I like him against the Hurricanes. But
Crystal ball versus Billy, just live bet who's down in the start of the fourth quarter, because the other coach, one of these coaches is going to mess that game up. That's just how that game has to go.
Yeah. Well, boy, I can't believe I'm going to be back in my Florida boy here. So I'm going to go under 4.5. I do project this over. I do project this 4.87. But the problem is the juice on the 4.5, which this was 5.5, and it's been hit hard by everybody. And I'm just saying right now that the juice doesn't match what the number is. If I make it 4.9, it's under 4.5 plus 130. There's a little bit of value going on there. So I would take that, but I would complement an under with a money line bet against Miami in game 1. They lose that game, your win total is probably solid. It's probably decided. They win that game, they can still lose this win total, but you cashed out the exact same bet size in the very first game. So that's how I'm playing the Gators this year. And you know what? Old Sarkisian was at media day saying, I'm gonna do my best Nick Saban now that he's retired, and I'm gonna start hiring guys that have had troubles as head coaches in certain places. Well, you can look right here, because I'll say his name. Billy Napier might be on Texas's staff by the time the playoff rolls around if this thing works out the way the schedule says.
Yeah. I'm curious. You mentioned Roberts' new coach. He does have a previous relationship with Armstrong as well. I like some of the pieces on the defensive line, even with the loss of one of your defensive ends in interconference. My questions are linebacker and corner. Those would be my two biggest question marks on the defense, and we'll see if they can force some more turnovers, limit the explosiveness. We'll see what some of those staff changes can do, because they definitely had issues last year. All right, let's move on to the Missouri Tigers, who are a bit over 20-1 to win the SEC, sitting around a little more than 2-1, I think plus 180-ish to make the college football playoff. Win total 9.5, heavily juiced to the under. They are top 20 in returning production, but it's a tale of two stories. The offense, loaded, brings back almost everybody. The wide receiver room is elite, led by Luther Burden, Theo Weiss, Cooper, both tight ends. You do lose your All-American running back in Schrader, but you add two from the Sun Belt in Noel from App State and Carroll from Georgia State. Brady Cook is back at quarterback. The offensive line, the biggest questions would have been losing Foster to the NFL at left tackle and your left guard, stalwart Delgado, but you add Bryant at left tackle from SMU, who I like, and Green from Oklahoma at left guard. So it looks like you kind of can just slot them in, and there won't be much of a drop-off. Tollison and Johnson are very solid already in the interior. So the offense should be really good once again, assuming Brady Cook stays healthy, because if he goes down, it's Drew Pine. You saw Drew Pine last year get in the game of Arizona State. I mean, this season is toast if he gets hurt. The biggest questions are all going to come on defense, where they lost a lot. And this is a defense. They lost their best linebacker, both starting linebackers. Good thing is dealt with some injuries there, so they have some other guys that got experience. They lose their top 3 defensive backs, all to the NFL. 3 of their 4 starting defensive linemen, including their best defensive end. And you have a new defensive coordinator, Corey Batoon, who comes in from South Alabama, apparently staying with the 3-3-5 base, even though he's a 4-2-5 guy. The biggest questions are, you have along the defensive line, you lose your best there. They have the best defensive line prospect in the country. I'm curious to see if he can step up and make an impact this year. But edge and corner are major question marks. I think there's a small drop-off at linebacker as well. So I have some major questions about this defense, which I think takes an enormous step back after losing 5 to the NFL. It is an easy schedule. Easy non-con. I mean, we just talked about some hard schedules. Here's Missouri's non-con. Murray State, Buffalo, BC at home, and then at UMass. What a weird game. They go to UMass. Yeah, I mean, so really should be. And by the way, after those three, after Murray, Buffalo, Boston College, they have Vanderbilt at home.
Who's on a back-to-back road.
Yep, and then you're at Texas A&M before going to UMass. So if you win that Texas A&M game, there'll be dogs there, but you're talking about 6-0 start.
Yeah.
And so it's a very easy schedule, like a national average schedule. So and you also have a bye before that Texas A&M game, which helps. So their buys are even well timed. It's the easiest SEC schedule with a joke non-con. You avoid Georgia, Texas, Ole Miss, and LSU. You also face 6 new coaches. This is a team though that I want to fade coming into the year. They were, I mean, look, last year they went 10-2, then won their bowl game. But I mean, look, they beat South Dakota, Vandy, Kentucky, South Carolina, Tennessee, Arkansas, but their other 4 wins, they beat Middle Tennessee by 4. They beat Kansas State by 3. By the way, their kicker, my guy, Mevis, is no longer there, so that's certainly worth mentioning. They beat Memphis by 1 possession, beat Florida by 1 possession. They were also losing in the 4th at UK, and then they beat Ohio State in the bowl game, but they were playing with some backups and didn't even have a quarterback. Now, in fairness, they did lead late versus LSU in that, because they went 4-0 one-possession games. There was like a pick 6 late that made that LSU game not a one position. And they played Georgia pretty even, and they dominated Memphis. So there's some noise there, but they were definitely lucky in close games. They also had a +10 turnover margin. And then something that goes a little under the radar is Leary was extremely hurt when they played. Mertz got hurt when they played Florida. Your boy, KJ, he got hurt in the first quarter for Arkansas. And then I just mentioned Ohio State. So they played a lot. They benefited from some backup quarterback play. I don't think this team is getting to 10 wins. Though I have them favored in 10. 8 potentially by double digits, but I don't think they're getting there. And it's because of the defense. And even if everyone on the offense stays healthy, I think the defense takes a big step back. What are your thoughts on the Tigers?
I have no love for this defense, but I do love Corey Batoon coming in as defensive coordinator. Right underneath Kane Womack, some of the best defenses G5 has put out. Just ask Oklahoma State and Ollie Gordon last year. So, from a defensive perspective, they're outside the top 100 in allowing explosives. They're outside the top 100 in finishing drives. I still don't know how Blake Baker got the job at LSU. But, Batoon calls a lot of cover 3, and he is aggressive on blitz, 34% last year for the Jaguars down in the Sun Belt. Secondary is a complete reset. I don't think that they can improve on defense, especially in the back half, than what they were in the front. I mean, they were 11th in defensive havoc. They were 18th against the run as far as efficiency is concerned. They were top 25 in defensive line yards. Can they keep that up? Maybe, but it is the only thing on defense it's worth talking about. But the offense, they still have a ton of weapons. I mean, Luther Burden, the big thing last year, a year ago, we were talking about how he was moving from wideout down to the slot. Well, 1,200 receiving yards later in an ultra explosive 3.3 yards per route run. This is the best slot wide receiver in the nation. Marcus Carroll of Georgia State, Nate Noel of App State. They should take over for Cody Schrader. I do worry about how much Drink talked about at SEC Media Days about how much of a leader Cody Schrader was in the clubhouse, locker room, practice field, dinner, organized events off campus. It was all Cody Schrader. So I do worry about that. I mean, they bring in the numbers, they bring in the talent in the backfield, but that is a loss. I just can't. The bet on this team that I made is Missouri 5-1 to make the SEC championship game. And my win total is 9. My win total on them is 9.4. But let's go through the schedule, the SEC schedule. You're right. It all lines up perfectly. They get 2-week break before they go down to Texas A&M, right? And then they get UMass the following week. It's kind of a bye. I'm not sure if you and I are going to play first half UMass. That ought to be funny. And then later on, they do play Alabama, but then they get 2-week break before they host Oklahoma. I mean, it is such a great schedule, and I'm not worried about the last 3 teams that they're going to go up and play against. So how many losses in the SEC are we looking at? I only see 2. I see Alabama, and then there's a coin flip where you get 2 weeks rest to go into Texas A&M. This is easy. So maybe they finish up 6-2 in the SEC. 7-1 is going to get you into the championship game, in my opinion, or it's going to put you in a tie, and we'll see tiebreakers. So the bet for me, Missouri 5-1 to make an appearance in the SEC championship game, and I've got it in my calendar. It's going to go off that week against Texas A&M, October 5th against Texas A&M. I'm buying the Aggies as a hedge. That game should be a coin flip. I don't expect either team to be favored by more than 3. You should be able to get a money line minus 120 or better on Texas A&M, and that serves as a great hedge to a 5-1 ticket on Missouri to be in Atlanta. I don't think they can win. They definitely have a ceiling, and they definitely can get exposed. I think Alabama's just going to I mean, they're going to have a whole circus trip with that secondary of Missouri. But this is a 7-1 SEC schedule, and Texas A&M is the pin that we got to focus on.
I say they finished 9-3, but it wouldn't shock me if they finish 8-4, especially if there's injuries. But I think they lose at Texas A&M, at Alabama, and then at South Carolina. Could easily lose against Oklahoma too. I mean, you want to talk about those issues in the secondary. It could be a long day there too. I mean, you lose your best edge rusher to the NFL, best linebacker to the NFL. So I think that the pressure might go down. I'm curious to see, but under opportunity, they're probably not going to blitz their safeties as much. Might be so there's definitely going to be some schematic change. But Adam Drain and Rakestraw, losing both of those, and then you're another safety, one of your starting safeties to the NFL. They're still in decent shape at safety. They're pretty deep there, but lots of questions.
I mean, but the converse of that is the hire of Kirby Moore from Fresno was just a boom for this offense. It's what got them over the 500 hump that Drink's been in every year. So no, I don't think anybody figured out Kirby Moore how to defend what it is that he puts in the field with Brady Cook and Luther Burden.
Yep. All right, but let's move on to your favorite team, the Tennessee Volunteers. Very similar high-level storylines heading into the season as Missouri. Pretty manageable schedule. Not as easy as Missouri, but it is significantly easier than the Floridas of the world. And there's major questions on defense. They lost almost everyone in the back end of their defense. Lost 10 defensive backs in the offseason, 3 to the NFL, 7 to the portal. There's a lot of questions across the board. Even at linebacker, you lose a ton. You get Peely back from injury, but the rest, there's questions. Defensive backfield just absolutely decimated across the board. You're going to need some transfers to hit on the back end of that defense. The defensive line should be good, led by Pierce at defensive end, but you did lose his running mate at the other spot in Tyler Barron. So the defensive line should be solid, but everything else is a question on defense. The offense, you lose your top 2 backs. Sampson takes over. There's some depth questions. At wide receiver, we lose a couple guys, but White and Thornton are back. McCoy returns from injury. Brazel, who I really like from Tulane, comes in. You had a tight end from Notre Dame. Offensive line, I think, should be okay. It really comes down to Nico on this offense and whether or not it reaches its ceiling. I think that it would help if an alpha steps up at receiver. You need that number 1 to emerge as the potential guy. And the quarterback depth is a bit scary, but Nico, young kid, we saw him flash against a really good defense in the bowl game against Iowa. So what can we get from him from a consistency, from a week in and week out perspective? I think will determine where this offense can go. But ultimately, it might be the defense that really holds this team back because there are a lot of questions on the back end. But in fairness to this Tennessee, and their main question is in the back end of the day, pretty manageable schedule of opposing pass offenses. You get NC State early. It's going to be a major test. We'll learn a lot about Nico and a defense that can confuse quarterbacks at NC State. At Oklahoma will not be easy. But, you have Arkansas, Kentucky, Mississippi State, UTEP, Vandy, Chattanooga, Kent State. So there's some teams on this schedule where you can get by, but I think it really lowers their potential ceiling if they don't figure out the back end of this D, because you still have Alabama, you still have Georgia, and Oklahoma, as I mentioned, and NC State. Win total 8.5, juice to the over, 18 to 1-ish to win the SEC. I project them around 8.6. I have them favored in 9, but I don't like the front-loaded schedule for a young quarterback, because it gets a little bit easier outside of that Georgia at the end of the year. But I have them a favorite in 9, but a single-digit favorite in 3. They do get to play 4 of the 5 worst teams in the SEC, avoid Texas, Ole Miss, and LSU, which, again, that's good for a secondary that has questions. You avoid Texas, Ole Miss, and LSU. But I didn't play anything on Tennessee preseason. How about you? What are your thoughts on the Vols, and what are you playing?
I did play against them in the preseason here. Now, Nico, I mean, his Heisman market down to 15 to 1 seems a little crazy, but at the same time, I have not heard anybody say that he can't do at least the job that Hendon Hooker did 2 years ago. I mean, all of the hate that I had for Tennessee last year was based on Joe Milton and the fact that Josh Heupel's stretch and spread offense requires to stretch the field, and then all of the wideouts have timing routes, and they have to stay on their routes. And if their steps aren't perfect, it's going to, the offense isn't going to work as well. That's why Hendon Hooker was perfect. He could hit anybody at 3 seconds, 5 seconds, 2 seconds. He knew exactly where everyone was going to be. Joe Milton didn't have that accuracy. There's no problem here with Nico. Accuracy, timing. He's going to be able to run Josh Heupel's offense. Squirrel White's back. He had 359 snaps out of the slot, most targets on the team. He'll be back. And then Dante Thornton from Oregon is light on experience, but he averaged well over 2 yards per route run in each season that he was there with the Ducks. So I think he can serve as that wide out that maybe what Nico is going to need if we want to compare to 2 years ago. And the offensive line, they're not supposed to have any problems this year. It's supposed to be a decent offensive line, but they did allow 12 pressures out of 19 dropbacks by Nico against Iowa. So you're going to have to protect him just a little bit more. There's tons of seniors in the trench, and LSU transfer Lance Hurd comes in to protect the blind side there for Nico. The defense is where my play came in. I mean, the secondary wasn't just wiped on the starters. The second string was wiped. Literally, there was nobody in the 2 deep whatsoever. The names read there's like zero experience. There's nothing significant from a recruiting standpoint either. So they're in a lot of trouble. Now they will be favored in 9 games. They're going to be coming off a bye week in favorite spots against Arkansas at home, and then at home against Kentucky. So there are favorable spots, but there's just 3 games here you're not going to win. You're not going to beat Oklahoma. You're not going to beat Alabama. And you're not going to beat Georgia. They all 3 have quarterbacks that can get into that secondary real fast. And I'm sure it might be the first play of the game when you see those 3 quarterbacks going up against it. I think they have absolutely no shot to win those games. That puts their ceiling at 9 wins. I project them closer to 8 than I do 9. They have to sweep the remaining schedule outside of those 3 games. I don't see it happening with a secondary like this. You're going to get into a lot of shootouts. Are we completely convinced that Arkansas can't throw downfield? We'll talk about them, on the next pod. But yes. Are we completely convinced that Graham Mertz can't his accuracy, that he's not going to be able to get something downfield?
Well, NC State with McCall and a much improved wide receiver room. That's not an easy game in Charlotte in week 2.
You just go down the schedule and ask yourself, which one of these teams can get into the secondary? It's a lot. And that has me with a bet. And I don't like betting juices more than minus 150 in preseason. I hate it. You guys almost never see it in the action app. After 6-7 years we've been doing this, I almost never do it. But Tennessee, no playoff, minus 220 is a fabulous number when it comes to a value perspective. Now, you heard Stuck rattle off the teams that we think that make the college football playoff, and then I said it goes 5 deep, and one of those 5 teams that has a projection over 9.2 is not Tennessee. This is not good because the secondary is going to get hit pretty bad, and it's going to keep them from getting to 9. I think they win 8 best. So no playoff minus 220.
Yeah, the interesting thing, you mentioned the Heisman, and we'll have more Heisman content coming up before the season. But if the defense takes a big step back, there's major questions in the secondary. What does that mean? Well, what did we just see last year? Right? Daniels won the Heisman. Team wasn't spectacular. Wasn't in the mix for a college football playoff spot. Shootouts, put up silly numbers against bad teams, and then shootouts against good teams. There's going to be some potential opportunities for Nico to put up some silly numbers because they're definitely going to be in some shootouts. So that's the bullish case if you were interested or already bet him to win the Heisman. All right, let's move on now to the South Carolina Gamecocks. Win total 5.5, juiced, taking some over money, juiced a little bit more to the over from where it was about a month ago. Last year finished 5-7. Spencer Rattler is out. You're going to have a new signal caller under center. Hopefully you can get him some help in the running game. They averaged under 3 yards per carry last year. They also lose everyone at wide receiver. Major question mark, heavy transfer reliant in that position. The offensive line, definitely part of the reason why they couldn't really run the ball last year, but you have 4 starters back. Bring in a couple transfers. You're much more experienced. You're hoping that position group takes a leap. This should be a heavy run-based offense. On the defensive side, the defensive line is very deep. There's a lot of talent there. They do need to find just a more of a consistent pass rush. But the front seven is solid. I like their safeties. Cornerback is the major question for me, especially at one of the spots. And going back to the offensive side of the ball, I think, look, if you can find, you might have a freshman starting at left tackle. You could find the offensive line chemistry, continuity. If you can find that with that group, the best group looks like, you got to have someone needs to step up as the number 1 receiver. And then can your boy Rocket Sanders, can he stay healthy? Because if he can, the running game should be much better than it was last year. So there's a lot of questions on this team, but they're definitely intriguing. I like them coming into the year. I project them at 5.9. So one of the rare unders, one of the rare overs that I actually would consider in the SEC. Don't really like many based on my projections. They do have 4 easy wins on the schedule. You have Old Dominion at home. You have Akron at home. You're at Vanderbilt, although that spot is a bit trappy. And then you have Wofford at home. So that should be your absolute floor. And you have some tough conference home games, which might really limit their ceiling. When you're playing at home, you're playing LSU, Ole Miss, Texas A&M, Missouri, and then I didn't even get into you're going to Oklahoma and Clemson. So low, floor of 4 here. Rest of the schedule, they're in the SEC at South Carolina. It's obviously going to be tough, but it's not as tough as it has been with the divisions. It used to be even tougher for South Carolina, which also will end the year at Clemson. What say you on South Carolina with a fresh face under center?
Yeah, I mean, from a strength of schedule perspective, we got Florida at number 1, Missouri at 29th, and South Carolina at 17th. So if you want to know how tough this schedule is, it kind of falls right outside the top 20, or right inside the top 20. Shane Beamer goes 5-7, and he didn't fire either of his coordinators or make any huge changes with Dowell Logans and Clayton White. I mean, there's a case to be made that both of them really failed at their job. I know that Razorback fans were extremely happy when Dowell Logans took off for South Carolina, but no changes were made on either side, and the trenches were just horrific. That's the biggest problem with this team. The offense ranked 118th in sacks allowed. The defense ranked 121st in tackles for loss. And nothing has been done in the offseason to improve the offensive line or the defensive line. So now who's going to play quarterback for us? 3-star dual threat Lenoris Sellers, 6'3".
You also got Robbie Ashford in the mix from Auburn. Just would you think of both them? Dual threat, mobile guys, limited passers.
That's the good news, right? The playbook fits both quarterbacks. 6'3", 245. Lenoris Sellers is a mountain. But he's a 3-star, and he runs a ton of inside-outside zone. It's just zone heavy, and that's what it's going to be for Raheem Sanders, for Rocket Sanders. My old Razorback, 2,200 career rushing yards, 17 touchdowns, but consistent injuries. And, we'll talk about the Razorbacks later. Raheem is no stranger to playing behind an inefficient offensive line. So at least he's got that going for him. There's no current receiver. This is what I can't get my head wrapped around. This is crazy in this day. No current receiver on this roster garnered more than 12 receptions last year. What? Like, how is it that empty? The offensive line injuries There was a lot of injuries last year in the offensive line. They return a lot of bodies. They're light on experience. Center Rashawn Lee, he's the highest graded run blocker and pass blocker. So at least they do have it figured out at the center position. And I would expect Lenora Sellers is going to probably have some success with Rocket Sanders doing zone read against defensive front sevens that have holes. There's not a lot of them on the schedule, though. So they had 700 plays on defense last year in 4-2-5 personnel. The back seven is definitely the strength. I already mentioned how poor this defense was in the trench. The Gamecocks, I think they dodged the upper tier of the SEC. They don't have Georgia. They don't have Texas. But guess what? You get every other team that's projected to be in the top half. And, back-to-back road trips in September against Alabama and Oklahoma, those are 2 losses. And then you're going to be double-digit favorites against this joke of a non-con. And then you got Vanderbilt, which you'll be a big favorite on, but that's it. You're done. Gamecocks are not expected to be a favorite in any other game except the non-con and Vanderbilt. And Kentucky is the only game where they're an underdog of a spread that's in single digits. So I don't see any way this team gets to 5.5. I project them at 5.4. But you just go down, I do not back teams that are terrible in the trench, especially on both sides of the ball. And I am not backing these coordinators. Not a fan of either of them. Beamer's seat is getting as hot as Aranda and Pittman. Let's see how this plays out. But they're not making a bowl again. So under 5.5, -105, very juice friendly.
I semi-disagree. I would lean over. Not sure if I'll end up playing it. So I do worry about the offensive line. I worry about just the schedule, obviously, the one-dimensional offense. So there's definitely some questions, but I'm a bit higher than the market on South Carolina.
You're a smart better because you're not going to bet on Robbie Ashford, Sellers Norris, and this offensive line. You're smart. There's just certain situations where you pull back from the number and you're like, I can't do this. Yeah,
there's also some. You mentioned the offensive line. At one point, they had, I think, 12 or 13 guys hurt last year along the offensive line. There's some decent scheduling spots. I also don't like the fact that, like, Kentucky, week 2, they're not going to throw the ball. How are you going to run on Kentucky, right?
Right.
And I have them as a single-digit dog in that.
And can you get into LSU secondary? Probably not.
Yeah, can you take advantage of LSU secondary? Yeah, probably not. And then, Ole Miss's defensive line is going to be really good. Alabama, always have a good defensive line. Oklahoma's front seven, very good. Texas A&M's defensive line, very good. So, the game that I would probably need them to win, they're gonna have to beat Missouri. But I'm gonna be fading Missouri in some aspect. But I might just bet them as an underdog in that game. I do at least avoid Georgia and Texas.
Even Vanderbilt has a quarterback that can take advantage of this defensive line. So I'm excited.
Stop. All right, we're getting to speaking of Vanderbilt, let's go to Vanderbilt, a team that will not get to a bowl. Win total sitting at right around 3, over 3, -115, -120. They are 500 to 1 to win the SEC if you're in the mood to throw away and burn some money. This is Clark Lee's team still. I'm not sure for how long, but this Vanderbilt team, look, they bring in a new offensive coordinator, a new offensive staff. It's basically New Mexico State again. Jerry Kill is even an analyst. Tim Beck comes over as the OC. Diego Pavia, the Ponzi scheme, is now in Nashville. Although he wasn't running with the ones. It might be Nate Johnson, the transfer from Utah. They're going to run like a gimmicky offense, which is what they should do. It's going to be like an option-based offense. They're going to be like rotating offensive linemen, apparently, like these rotating. It's going to be a funky offense.
So what you're meaning is, the right side of this offensive line is good, right? But when they're going to run the ball left, they're going to line up their guard and tackle to the left. When they're going to run the ball right, they're going to line these 2 guys up to the right. That has never worked in Pee Wee high school football. I don't understand that, but let's try here.
Yeah. They lost their top 3 receivers of the portal, and that was the strength of the team last year in Shepard, Humphreys, and McGowan. Look, everyone's gone to quarterback, but you bring in Pavia. Also, Pavia's backup, and then Nate Johnson.
Yep.
This team it's bad. I don't know what to say. They lost both their linebackers, 2 safeties, their best defensive lineman. I love CJ Taylor. He's probably their best player. And he's moving to free safety, but I like their safeties. That's about it. They can't get pressure. Horrible coverage the last 3 years. bottom 20 pasty the last 4 years. Like, there's just not much like. And then, by the way, they have a really hard schedule. Vandy's always gonna have a hard schedule, but they have even a harder schedule for Vandy this year. Third toughest in the SEC. They also don't get to face Arkansas or Mississippi State. Sorry to put your Hogs in that class, but they're projected to finish down by the bottom, and they don't get to play either one of those. They have 3 winnable games on the schedule, in my opinion. So I would lean under if I had to bet it. I project. What do I project? I project 2.9. So I don't see a ton of value to get involved here. But they play Alcorn State at home. They're at Georgia State, and they're home against Ball State. I look at Georgia State, like Ball State, like this is who Vandy should be playing. Like their win total will be like 8.5, 9 if they were in like the MAC, in the Sun Belt. This is what they need to do. I don't know, understand. And then I don't know why they're in the SEC. It's insane. I look at the projected spreads. 9 games on their schedule. I'm going to have them as an underdog of 14 plus. 7 times 21 plus. I mean, I look at their projected spreads. It's shocking. The second half of the schedule, hey, plus 30, plus 31. I mean, it's insane. So they have, in my opinion, and they could steal one. I mean, they could maybe steal one against South Carolina. You catch someone in just a bad spot, but you start with Va Tech at start the year off. Weird things happen in week 1, but they're really going to have to steal one to get to 4 wins.
Mm-hmm.
They'll be a favorite in 3 games. So I would lean under, but don't see much value here. What are your thoughts on the Doors?
Well, I'm sure every talking head and every podcast that's covering college football in the world is saying under. Who could do this? Who could take this? Welcome to the Big Bets on Campus, because I'm going to tell you that we're taking an over.
You're taking over 3?
Oh, I got money on it. It's in the app. Let's go. So
Ponzi
listen,
scheme.
$300 million in stadium renovations. They have got to get something going. Clark Lee says, I'm going to be the defensive coordinator. I'm going to go back to what I was at Notre Dame, running a 4-2-5. And frankly, he was excellent at it. And then what he did is he got Jerry Kill to come to town to essentially act as an acting head coach, except only focused on the offensive side of the ball. It was an unbelievable move after they snagged the offensive coordinator and quarterback from New Mexico State. The pipeline from Las Cruces to Nashville, it doesn't stop there. There are some transfers that came in with them, offensive line, some trenches, some areas that Vanderbilt needed help. But what is this offense going to look like? The Aggies ran plenty of 10 and 11 formation, 60% lean to the rush, of course, with Pavia. Zone read option is the backbone. So when you go through the schedule, you got to look at guys that have bad defensive interior to see if Pavia can take care of that, which is how I got back to South Carolina. So Pavia threw for 3,000 yards, another 1,000 on the ground, 33 total touchdowns. He's a machine. Now, the defense returns nearly 80% on every single stat category. Linebacker Langston Patterson is there. He is going to be Lee's guy in the middle. And floater in the 4-2-5. So I like that. But 130th in allowing opponents to create quality drives. Everybody got into scoring position. Everybody got past the 50. Everybody got in, got a chance to get points. So we'll see if Clark Lee's focus there can stop any of these things that are pretty bad. 125th in coverage, 118th in pass rush. Lee has got to have his best year of his entire career to get this Vanderbilt team inside the top 100. Now, they're going to be favorites in 2 games, right? We talked about Alcorn and Ball State. Not even worried about that. I mean, after what I watched Pavia do, I think the September 14th game against Georgia State, that's a game that I project Vandy on the road to be a favorite by 3. That's pretty tight.
That's what I project too.
Yeah, and you did this. You did the Sun Belt pod, and Georgia State is rough when it comes to experience, right? I mean, we're talking could be bottom of the cellar there in their division. I'm sorry, in the conference. So, I think that could get them to 3. But after that, you're going to have an SEC upset to get over this win total. Well, what do you know? Vandy goes to Auburn on November 2nd. Jerry Kill has beaten Hugh Freeze 2 years in a row. Once when Hugh Freeze was with the Flames last year to ruin my over 6.5 Auburn win total.
Is this a revenge bet for that Auburn loss? This is you getting back?
No, I mean, my win total projection mathematically is dead on 3, but I see 3 wins on this schedule. So I'm playing the over because can they snag one somewhere down the line? Sure. South Carolina's on the schedule. Sure. Auburn's on the schedule. No problems there, right? Oh, by the way, Missouri's on this schedule. Now, listen, I'm a fan of Missouri, but Diego Pavia against that defense, come on, that could be your spot. We both could help each other out here. I'm going over 3. I projected it pushes.
I will be rooting for the Ponzi scheme against Missouri. I'll tell you that.
All right, well, we're okay. We're both all in here because that's the game to get over.
I'm not sure it's going to be Pavia, by the way, and it's a big jump going to the SEC. I think Nate Johnson was the. I think today was the starter with the ones. Now
he knows how to
disclosure. We're recording this early August, by the way, so like some things could change by the time this comes out. You both will probably get looks early in the season, and then they're going to be in some blowout losses, so you're going to see both, and then we'll see where it goes. Yeah. So the quarterback position is definitely in flux, but good luck to you and finding an SEC win, or maybe you steal the opener. Every year we see a couple upsets in week 1, and they're going to have a gimmicky offense, right? That it's which I think that they should do. They're such a talent discrepancy that just go full gimmick.
Run the triple.
Yeah, and it's not like it's an unwinnable game in the opener. They're going to be 13, 14-point dogs.
There's so much love for Virginia Tech in the market. It's actually going to be a really good number on the board when we get there.
Yeah. All right, let's close things out with the Texas Longhorns. Hook 'em. Horns down, by the way, won't be penalized. The SEC announced, so expect to see plenty of those signs. This is a team that went 11-1 in the regular season last year, won the Big 12 championship in blowout fashion, went to the college football playoff, and lost to Washington despite a chance to win that game late. This is a team that has a lot of continuity, especially on the staff. Quinn Ewers back at quarterback. There's still some questions there, specifically just around his deep ball footwork. That's just something that I hope we'll see once the season rolls around, that he just needs to work on. Hasn't really put the time in based on reports to really work on it, just because his arm talent is so spectacular. And he's such a talented kid. Arch Manning, maybe he'll get some more looks this year, but he's back as the backup. Great insurance policy, right? If there's an injury, we just talked about Missouri. Yeah, Drew Pine coming in there. If Brady Cook gets hurt, if Quinn Ewers is to go down for any stretch, you do have Arch Manning in there. Lose Brooks at running back, but he was hurt last year. Baxter and Blue, you'll be fine there. The big question on offense, offensive line is they have SEC physicality. Like they're okay there. Right tackle, only question there after losing Jones, something that I'm watching. Wide receiver room is interesting because you lose 3 to the NFL and your tight end Sanders. It was Whittington, Mitchell, and Worthy. Bring in a lot of guys in the portal. You have a bunch of 5 stars. Who's stepping up as the one? What does that room look like? Sark said that they might play 7 wide receivers. He said that, look, it's a long season. We might have to play, 4 or 5 extra games, but then you go to the SEC championship and the college football playoff. So he wanted to be more focused on, reps and depth. So they have a lot of guys, but how's that room going to come together? That's definitely a question. Bigger questions on the defense, because you lose 2 mountains in the middle in Sweat and Murphy. Those are huge losses. Collins brought in the next guys up. It's definitely a downgrade. You added a couple from Arizona. Lole, who has a lot of experience, he's going to be relied upon. Your defensive ends are back. You had Trey Moore from UTSA. We'll see if he can make the leap to the SEC. You lose a linebacker in forward to the NFL. You lose a couple defensive backs to the portal. If I had questions on this defense, interior of the defensive line, you could not run on Texas last year. You couldn't do it. So you had to throw it, and the defensive backfield wasn't great. Still have questions there on the defensive backfield. You bring in a couple of transfers who you're hoping will help in that department. if I'm going to spin this positively, because I think their defensive line and hence their run D is going to take a step back. Some of the elite teams that they do face have a lot of offensive line turnover, right? So Michigan going to face in week 2, a lot of offensive line turnover is an example there. Oklahoma, the Red River rivalry, face them game 6, a lot of offensive line turnover. So toughest games in the schedule. How those offensive lines come together probably goes a long way in determining if Texas reaches their ceiling. Because if those offensive lines are really struggling, Texas can get away with some of their defensive line issues. They also will host Georgia after that Oklahoma game, as you mentioned. And then they finish up the year at Texas A&M in the regular season finale. They avoid Ole Miss, LSU, Missouri, Alabama, and Tennessee. They also get 5 of the 6 worst projected teams. So it's a pretty manageable SEC schedule, all things considered. What makes it a bit tougher is that game week 2, you're going to Michigan. Not an easy place to play, even though they have a lot of change. Super talented team, back-to-back top 10 recruiting and transfer classes. They have the SEC physicality, but there's some questions on this roster. But they're going to be in the mix. Their win total 10.5, juice to the under, plus, let's see, plus 350 to win the SEC, minus 230 favorite to make the college football playoff. What are your thoughts on the Longhorns?
Well, let's get the off-field stuff out of the way. Congrats to special teams coordinator Jeff Banks. He married his longtime fiance, the pole assassin. And then she deleted her Instagram. So she announced it all on Instagram
Cheers.
and deleted it. So cheers. Way to get married. Sark, I'm there for you. I understand, made a public announcement about getting a divorce. Been there before. Good luck. We'll see how it plays out on this field. There's a couple of off-field stuff that's going on with these guys and running this team. But I think the overall thing with this team is even everybody down in Texas that writes about this team, talks about this team's not as good as it was last year. They are missing some of the heavy talent that got them to the playoff last year. Now, they do have 90% of experience coming back on the offensive side of the ball. It's the most solid 2 deep in the country, maybe outside of Georgia. Even Quinn Ewers, who I had an in-depth conversation with one of our writers here at Action that's helped us out over the years, CJ Vogel. We talked at length about Quinn Ewers. And he pointed out, go pull up the numbers on the route tree because there's certain things that he can't hit. If anything is a timing route, hitches, curls, comebacks, he can't hit it. Boy, we deep dived into those numbers and he was right. So Ewers has limitations. And some of the work that, the numbers that are put out there were really kind of produced by the weapons that he has, not really by Quinn Ewers. So keep that in mind. Running back CJ Baxter, Jaden Blue are back, 1,000 rushing yards, 8 touchdowns from last year. Isaiah Bond is going to be the burner. Don't really need to worry about curls and comebacks with him. He's going to be flying down the sideline, coming in from Alabama. You flip to the other side of the ball, the 4.25 of Pete Kwiatkowski got it working last year. I think maybe the Gary Patterson shadow might have raised a flag for him to get it done. 80% of tackles, nearly all of the PBUs from last year comes back. But have we resolved our issues with the secondary? The secondary that was an issue in the Big 12 play, the secondary that was an issue in the college football playoff game with Michael Penix. Javion Cole was graded as one of the best corners nationally at San Jose State. He comes in. Andrew Makuba. Yeah, big jump. Andrew Makuba comes in from Clemson. And when I saw that in the portal, I thought, man, that's a really good get at safety. And then you go dive into his numbers. It's really replacement level numbers. I mean, there's nothing in his coverage numbers that say that this has fixed their problems. So this secondary is still extremely vulnerable to passing attacks. Then, you said Trey Moore of UTSA, heavy pressure from the edge is still coming, but the not being able to replace Tavondre Sweat at the defensive interior is massive. They didn't get anybody out of the portal. They tried. They didn't get any defensive interior play. They did get some defensive interior players, but not like Tavondre Sweat. Look at the schedule.
And Murphy too.
Yeah, Murphy too. Yeah. I mean, they're gone. That hurts against the run. That hurts against the pass. That hurts everywhere.
I also, but by the way, I'll mention before you get in the schedule, special teams are definitely a concern for me. I mean, they lose a lot. They lose like their gunners, their returners, their punter. Something to definitely keep in mind for a team that did go 3-1 in 1 possession games last year during the regular season. But get ahead with the schedule, because the one thing I do like about the schedule is that before that game at Texas A&M, which is the regular season finale, won't be easy. because I have them favored in 11 games, but they have 4 tough games at Michigan, at Texas A&M, Georgia, and Oklahoma. But the bullish case on Texas making the college football playoff, part of the if you're going to make it, is that Texas A&M game. If they already have 10 wins, then they're in already, right? Before that game, and their path to 10 wins. Say they even lose to Michigan. And I have them the small favorite of Michigan. There are only 2 true road games, but between Michigan and Texas A&M are Vanderbilt and Arkansas. No disrespect to your Hogs. But I mean, obviously they also have to place Georgia at home, Oklahoma in the Red River rivalry. But there's only 2 SEC road games against 2 of the bottom teams before that Texas A&M game. But go ahead on the schedule and your overarching thoughts.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you go back historically and look at what Texas has done after Red River, even with Sark, it's been bad. Lost to Oklahoma State, survived Iowa State by I think a field goal. Like it's just never. It's always a hangover. It's something they can't get back on track. Who do you get after Red River this year? Georgia. That's going to be tough. I mean, there are tricky spots, I think, on the schedule. I mean, UTSA comes in after Michigan. I don't expect UTSA to win, but I mean, that's after Michigan. Arkansas is going to be off a bye when they host them in Fayetteville. Potentially an interim coach there. We'll find out. Last game of the season against Texas A&M I think the best version of Mike Elko's team is going to be that last, considering everybody's in full health. I think the best version of the Aggies is going to be in that last game. So when I looked at it, I kind of tweened. I was about 10.3 on the win total. The under 10.5 has just been getting wailed on the last month in the betting market.
Yeah, I'm 10.1 is what I project.
Yeah, to me, the juice was just so much out of control that I started looking elsewhere. Then I got to SEC Media Days, and I remembered this team is horrific on offense when it counts. 3.8 points per trip last year. They were 72nd in offensive finishing drives.
Red zone was terrible.
Texas. Sark's first year, they were 4th in red zone TD efficiency. Last year, 120th in red zone TD efficiency. I got a little sidebar with Sark and down in Dallas. So what's going on here? When you don't have Roshan Johnson and you don't have Bijan Robinson and you can't run the Rocat at the goal line, it took a lot of stuff out of our playbook at the goal line. Have you identified people on this year's squad? Well, we haven't. We think there could be some leaders, but we haven't identified the goal line package. And I'm just like shaking my head. Okay. My bet, because the juice is out of control in the under, alternate team total under 9.5 plus 160. It's out there. Georgia game, I'm chalking that up as a loss. They're going to have to trip up elsewhere. Maybe it's Red River. Maybe it's Michigan in the opener. What's Michigan going to do? They're going to line up and run right at your new defensive interiors. They're not going to throw the ball. But, you know, to me, that Texas A&M game, do I think that the Aggies have a shot in the last game of the season and what is going to be an absolute war when these two rivals hook back up? Absolutely. Would I lay a money line on Texas A&M in the last game of the season? I would. So why not? Under 9.5 plus 160 alternate team total under. I mean, I think there's chances to get out of that. There's chances to hedge that. And if you know what, I may need A&M at the end of the year, but that's my favorite bet.
We will talk A&M on part 2, so that's a good place to end here. And as I mentioned previously, we will recap our favorite bets for the entire conference at the end of part 2. And in part 2, we'll cover the old SEC West plus newcomer Oklahoma. So make sure you go check that out now. It'll already be out. Thanks for joining me, Colin. Thanks to our producers on the back end. Most importantly, thanks to all of you for tuning in. Make sure you subscribe, unsubscribe, tell a friend, tell an enemy. YouTube, if you're watching on YouTube, hello. Make sure you hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. Also, if you aren't watching on YouTube, go to our YouTube channel, BBOC. Make sure you hit that subscribe button. Really helps us out. 5-star reviews help us out as well. Do giveaways all throughout the season. All you got to do, you can say whatever you want. Tennessee and Texas fans, I expect to hear from you, trashing Colin for his takes. But we will be back for part 2, which is out now. So we'll see you there for the conclusion of the SEC. Cheers.
Peace out.